All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Mary Eleanor Power. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Faculty of Open Learning and Career Development at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I am delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Transition to Sustainable Energy Technologies. And before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people, and we recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kma'ki, known as Nova Scotia, for over 400 years. So before I pass it off to Jorge to introduce himself and also to introduce Lincoln, I do just want to offer a few housekeeping notes. The first being that today's webinar is being recorded, and then later today we'll be sending around an email. So keep an eye on your inboxes. If you miss any part of today's webinar, if you'd like to rewatch it, or better yet, share it with colleagues, then you'll be receiving a recording of the webinar later today that will be hosted on our YouTube channel. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to include them in the chat. We will have some time at the end to answer questions, and Jorge and Lincoln will be pausing halfway through to also address any questions. But not only questions, feel free to add in your comments, reactions to some of the information that will be shared today. And without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Jorge, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Mary Eleanor. Thank you. So, first of all, today we'll have this very special guest speaker, Lincoln Wardle. Lincoln is a site manager for Vestas Canadian Wind Technology, located in Nova Scotia, in Canada, in your territory. So I'll let Lincoln explain and tell you more about Vestas shortly. Lincoln lives with his wife, Chloe, in Dartmouth, and has worked in the wind industry at Vestas for 15 years, being the last 5 years managing Vestas service and maintenance department in the province. So Lincoln took the SET program at Dalhousie. I supported him. Lincoln didn't really need much support from myself. You were pretty familiar with the program itself. But of course, he will be showing us some of this knowledge, or his knowledge of the industry, and some insights too on what's been happening and is going to happen with renewables in Nova Scotia, and of course in a big chunk of Atlantic Canada. So first, I'll introduce the program. I'm the main instructor for it, and I'll try to transmit all the importance I see in this discipline. I'm currently based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I've been involved in projects mostly aiming for assertively assessing the impacts of deploying solar generating facilities of different sizes in specific areas and communities. And in the face of potential positive outcomes, we as a group would determine and design educational programs for all the stakeholders involved in those projects, so their execution wouldn't compromise the adherence to the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. So just to illustrate a bit more and a bit better my interest and the effort and skills put in these areas, and with a global ambition, of course, I gotta say that as a South American citizen, I can see how relevant it is to study and work here in Brazil. And this is in terms of learning from the outside, learning from countries and schools like the Canadian one, and sharing from the inside, so my experiences here, and then being able to transmit all of that to the people trying to understand from the outside. So all the knowledge and the applications available are included in this. And Brazil, just as Canada, has a semi-continental extension. These are huge countries with all sorts of natural resources and, of course, major economies. So they have significant impacts on the world's dynamics and the world condition itself in terms of environmental sustainability. I'm totally convinced that these disciplines, when we talk about sustainability, all of this knowledge has to be locally adapted. And even though it's fundamental to have those examples and the benchmarking from different scenarios and different examples, the key is to share the basis and the knowledge, so everyone, no matter where we are or in which position we are, we can start developing our own roles in this energy transition. So let's take a look at why is the energy transition such an important topic. So first of all, it's good to clarify that the main reasons why this term transition is being used in these disciplines, and especially in this webinar. So with increasing complex issues in our society, like environmental issues, global warming, especially, but also the increase in inequality in the world, it's important that every one of us and every actor in society is really contributing to better it in some way. So of course, we cannot solve these problems by just having individual efforts, or let's say nonprofits or governments alone. These organizations and we as individuals should collaborate and make, let's say, this transition a real process and make the world a more sustainable place overall. So first, I would like you to take a look at the graph from the World Economic Forum here. Of course, if someone wants to comment on it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll have a Q&A section shortly, so please feel free to bring your comments and questions then. And what I want you to see there, I hope you can read it. There's most of the risks that are identified in that graph are environmental, and for the long term or the 10-year term, the environmental risks are at the top of the assessment. So that means that, of course, these are the issues that we're facing now that are the most important ones to actually look out for and to assess and work on in the short term. So before we get to that mark of 10 years and then evaluating again and assessing again what's been happening, we need to start acting right now, because as you see there, most of them will be determined by environment. So of course it might sound also very, very ironic, and there are no economic risks that are recognized by the World Economic Forum. And that's ironic because the way, as long as we treat the planet as a subsystem of the economy, which is the usual way so far, and not the other way around, that the economy is a subsystem of the planet, we'll have all sorts of backlashes. So it's really intriguing that we don't see economic risks, but we're seeing environmental risks. The thing is, if we don't assess these ones, if we don't face these ones, the economic risks will come will come next to them. They're part of them. So these risks that are here don't surprise experts. They have been there for a long time, and it's just that right now governments can't ignore them anymore, and policies have to be made because otherwise we're in a very tough position. The way our system works could be lost, since no subsystem is sustainable if there is no environmental sustainability overall. So we have to focus and do a good job in transitioning. This is the key word here, and we have to know that this means lots of changes, lots of impacts, but it's the only way. There's no way to go back and change the way we have been developing as a society, or as different societies in just one world, and we need to transition soon. Our system, of course, demands us to do business as agents of capitalism and as part of human organizations inside the capitalist system. So the very basic challenge is to start doing this business differently. So taking part in tackling all these environmental challenges as possible. How's the world been behaving in terms of energy transition? So what we see here in this graphic, there is a very steady and modest growth until 2021. And then last year we saw a more significant growth, big projects commissioned, huge investments in solar energy, for instance. China became one of the biggest, it was already, but became in statistics, one of the biggest players in the solar photovoltaics economy. So China will have a very strong position in terms of renewable energy growth. And this all was kind of consolidated last year. So what do we have for Canada specifically? So Canada announced, by the very beginning of this year, they announced $60 billion US dollars in clean energy tax credits and 20 billion in sustainable infrastructure investments as part of this year's budget. So at this space, we're talking about 80 billion US dollars, and this is a response to the US, to the United States Inflation Reduction Act, which committed nearly 370 billion US dollars. That's showed one of the most important commitments in terms of clean energy projects and clean energy subsidies and tax credits in the history of the US economy. So, and Canada is not behind. Canada, with those 80 billion for just this 2023 budget, is expecting to have a huge portion of this budget in energy transition focused investments. So more than 25 billion will be used through 2035 through the Clean Energy Investment Tax Credit. And this is a 15% refundable tax credit for investments that go into this industry. So what we see here is that the growth that is needed in terms of renewable generation is actually being supported by these political initiatives, such as a 15% tax credit. That means a huge chunk of the money that's invested in clean energy technologies will be taken and will be absorbed by the Canadian government, which is a huge stake in this race. Some other tax credit proposals will include almost 18 billion for investments in clean hydrogen. So we're looking also at many different technological advancements that will include clean hydrogen, extraction, processing, and recycling of critical materials. We'll see energy storage. We'll see even some nuclear projects that will be included in this tax credit proposals. So Canada is doing taking a big step in terms of looking forward to the objectives that we need as a whole in the world to meet those goals for 2050, where if we wanna get to the point that we are looking for, we need to be net zero by 2050. And that's a long process. It's a tough process, but as you can see there, Canada is taking a huge step. So what we see is this big budget of 80 billion will secure big projects, including major battery manufacturing in Canada, which has very different examples of what's going to happen. Volkswagen subsidiary PowerCo is planning to build its first overseas battery, and it's going to be a gigafactory in St. Thomas in Ontario. And this will be a huge project for looking towards electric vehicles and looking towards electrifying the major cities. So taking huge steps towards smart cities in all Canada, and being able to using renewable energy generation, being able to sustain all the demands from this smart cities. So we'll see this growing, this kind of projects growing, and we'll see also the Canadian government taking part of this huge project. So the country is in quite a very bright way in this transition, and we hope that by 2030 the goals are met, and the pace, if Canada at least keeps that same pace all the way to 2050, Canada will have pretty good results in the search for its net zero energy production. How is it right now? So as we see here, this is a graphic from CanREA, Canadian Renewable Energy Association. So the growth in Canada installed wind and solar energy capacity has been quite rapid, considered the average of the world in its whole. So between 2009 and 2021, wind and solar energy accounted for 68% of new generation capacity additions in Canada, making these resources the dominant form of new capacity installed in Canada. As a result of that, well, these technologies met less than 1% of Canada's electricity demand in 2009, they met approximately 6.5% of Canada's electricity demand in 2020. And this, of course, as we saw in the world map, it's the growth of 1% to 6.5% in 11 years doesn't sound as significant, but in terms of how that pace can grow, not in an arithmetical way, but grow in terms of multiplying these factors and multiplying this growth factor by each year, this will put Canada in a very strong position in terms of renewables capacity. So Canadian Renewable Energy Association, its vision for 2050 presents an illustrative but a very conservative scenario that would see wind and solar energy supply 2/3 of the new electricity required in Canada by 2050. So we're saying that just 1/3 of the electricity required by 2050 would be conventional or fossil fuel production. But in terms of growth of renewables, this could mean if Canada went 2/3 of it in non-emitting sources, Canada would make the goal of becoming net zero by 2050. So this will require lots of megawatts of wind energy, lots of megawatts of solar energy. We can talk about almost 4,000 megawatts of wind energy capacity and 1,600 megawatts of solar energy. And this is an annual add to the grid for each year until 2050. But this would mean that by then, Canada's energy capacity almost tenfolds over these next 3 decades that we have in front of us. So Canada is a huge market and is a huge player for the energy transition and for the discipline that we're looking at here. And I'll go into the program to explain a little bit how this program is built for professionals and for any person interested in understanding and being able to be part of this transition as smoothly as possible. So I'll show here just a few of the learning outcomes that this program has, and it fundamentally provides an introduction to sustainability and green technologies and demonstrates why these energy innovations are necessary for the future. This is something that it's widely discussed, but this program shows specifically how these developments are going to be fundamental for the energy transition. The learners in this program will be introduced to different types of clean energy technology, and of course there'll be wind turbines, solar power, hydroelectricity, geothermal energy. During the program we go through those, but very superficially. The focus is solar and wind power, and then we'll go also over energy storage and smart city technology. So we'll talk about microgeneration and how cities have to adapt in order to allow consumers to also produce their own energy and put it back in the grid if they're not demanding from the grid, from the national grid, or in terms of the Canadian political division in terms of provincial grids. And so how energy storage and self-production or micro generation for consumers will be such also an important part, will play such an important role in the transition of cities. There's also the focus on electrifying vehicles, so electric vehicles and electric transportation systems. So that's one of the major points that we'll go through too, and how this electrification of the transportation systems will increase demand for new energy sources. Right now, the world does have a big chunk of its cars and the vehicles are electrified, but we're using fossil fuel sources for generating this electricity. So that has to be also changed, that has to be switched to renewables. So renewables sustain the demand for electrical transportation. There's also all these clean energy technologies will be studied to understand how they can work in conjunction with or as replacement for conventional power sources. Because of course, at this point, renewable energy sources wouldn't be able to supply all the energy that is demanded by our society as a whole and by specific industries. So we still need to keep some of the conventional power sources working and just making sure that we're depending less and less on them as we go through the development of this big renewable projects. So we also look at that, acknowledging that there is no way that sustainable energy sources can just come and supply all the electricity and all the energy that we need as a society right now. So that's also a part of this program, and we'll see how these limits and these conditions allow us as institutions and as organizations to go through that transition in a responsible manner. More than that, we have to understand the specifics of these projects. So in terms of when we look at this and when we look at how, for instance, we can get support from the government and how we can get support from banks and investment institutions, these projects need to have a very specific set of performance indicators in order to meet the expectations from the government and from investment institutions and etc. So we go into ESG investments, for instance, and understanding what these projects need to have, the characteristics that they need to meet, so they can be considered actual sustainable and green projects. So based on all that fundamental understanding, we make sure that learners have the tools that are necessary to evaluate and compare the projects through, let's say, or included financial assessments, environmental assessments, and many other ways of evaluating projects. So people and learners can identify the best ways that they have to fund these projects and also to execute them, or through to just manage them through the process with the responsible indicators and the responsible performance that they need to have through these projects. So we'll see how current projects have to adapt to the current economical context, to the current political context, and the very organizations that they belong to. So in terms of when we talk, and we'll see, Lincoln will talk a little bit more about this, and when working with wind farms and working with solar farms, there are some demands that these projects have to meet throughout the process, and that's something that we look at in this program. So we look at the governmental, environmental requirements for the projects, and we make sure that learners are able to describe all of these requirements and identify them in order to, by the end of the project, be able to get these tax credits, get this support from institutions, etc. So any learner that goes to this program will be able to understand the very basics of it, the importance of it, and also to go through the project and identify the very key indicators that will make it a sustainable project, a green project, or let's say a project that can be considered a transition project towards renewables and towards a net zero future. So we talk about many types of projects. We focus on solar and wind, and then the idea for the learner is to be able to adapt all of these examples and all of this previous knowledge of different projects into their own careers, into their own professional standpoint, and of course in their homes, if they're interested into, they can bring all this information and make sure that whatever their project is or they want it to be, they can actually get this support from local governments. They can get support from banks. They can get support from different institutions that are working on this energy transition. So I guess this is basically what the program would cover. We go through from very basic fundamentals of renewable energy, through financial assessments, through environmental assessments, and then we look at many examples of green projects to see what advantages and what disadvantages they had, what in which areas were they accurate and in which areas they needed to perform better, etc. So the learner knows how they work and how and what's expected from these projects overall. Before I let Lincoln take the lead on this, on your own experience, please let us know if there are any questions or comments about the program, about the basics of it. So the microphone's open.
I'll pop back on here. Thanks so much, Jorge, for adding all of those details for us. I'm curious. I'll just jump in with a Q&A for myself and kind of perhaps folks to include their responses in the chat. I noticed that we have people joining us from municipal government, from federal government, private sector, and I'm curious just what brought you to today's webinar, and perhaps in sharing that with us, if you're comfortable, it will give us a sense of perhaps some other details that we're not elaborating on. So feel free to add that in the chat. Just what brought you here today, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to join us. But just was delighted to see the variety of people, variety of industries represented. So feel free to add that in the chat. And now I think just because of our time, perhaps Lincoln, if you want to take it from here, and yes, feel free to add your comments in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks for that lovely intro, Jorge. I'll try to meet your presentation skills as best as I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Lincoln Wardle. I'm a site manager for Vestas Wind Systems, and I manage all the service and maintenance of the assets that are located across the province of Nova Scotia. Yeah, I live in Dartmouth with my wife Chloe, and yeah, I've been at wind for about 15 years. So in the following slides, I may be a little bit biased to the wind industry, so I do apologize for that. But I hope you get some value of what we're sharing here today. So the first slide, Jorge brought up a really good point about the mix. Not one sustainable energy source is the ticket to manage all of the power consumption needs that we need as a society, basically. So in this slide, this is right off of the federal government's website. Basically, this is all the clean energy resources and projects across the Atlantic region. So this does not include any fossil fuel production stations or coal. So in a nutshell, about 2% of the mix, and this, I'm only going to use Nova Scotia numbers. I don't have the PEI or New Brunswick numbers in front of me, but yeah, just Nova Scotia. So 2% of the current energy mix is biomass generation. And if anyone has questions about biomass energy production and why it's considered clean energy, feel free to ask. I can briefly go through that because there is consumption, e-consumption to make energy out of that, but it's all measured in carbon offsets. All of the blue circles you'll see is all our hydroelectric generation stations through water damming and things like that. All the green ones, there's only one big green one in New Brunswick, that's nuclear. Yellow is solar, turquoise is tidal. There's not a lot of tidal going on right now, but there's some interesting technologies being developed in the Bay of Fundy, the greatest tide globally, which I'm hoping to see some new development on that front. And then the majority you'll see is red, and that is the wind mix, which is taking about 20% of all of Nova Scotia's current energy mix. And that's what I'm probably primarily going to speak about today. So go to the next slide, please. Sorry. So this is basically, and again, focusing on wind, this is all the current wind projects in Nova Scotia. So the Houston government set a target of 80% renewable energy sources by 2030. Currently, as of the end of last year, we're sitting at about 40% or 43%. The target was for the end of last year was 60%, but as some of you may know, there was some challenges with the maritime link to Muskrat Falls power generation in Newfoundland. For those who don't know what the maritime link is, basically it's an overland and undersea transmission line granting Nova Scotians access to electricity from the Lower Churchill hydroelectric project through Muskrat Falls. But it's only currently providing about 10% of the energy mix where it's supposed to be considerably higher. So hopefully we'll see some positive things with that as it runs up to full capacity. As far as wind, though, currently there's 78 wind projects in the province, producing about 616 megawatts. And I was actually surprised in the stat that Nova Scotia has provided, it's like the 5th largest installed wind production base in Canada, which is, for a small little province, that's pretty impressive, I must say. So yeah, we're powering 63,500 homes, and we're currently providing about 20% of the energy mix as of the end of 2022. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of what's coming down the pipeline in the next 2 years. Currently, there's 350 megawatts of awarded power purchase agreements from Nova Scotia Power last year, about 350 megawatts of new installation. And these are 25-year service and maintenance contracts, which are long-term jobs. And they'll have to be about a 97% availability, which is they have to be available to run power 97% of the time, basically. So that will bring another 36,000 homes online with wind energy production. And that should increase the wind mix to 30%. If the 350 megawatts of wind is built out on time, which we all know it will, that'll actually bring us to 75% of our goal of renewable energy sources in the province, which is with a 5% gap of our target. I mean, that's considerably early. So we are well on track to meeting our 80% target. Some fun stuff that Tim Houston brought out over the news a few months back was we're working with the federal government to develop 5 gigawatts of potential offshore energy sources. Now, offshore is really early in development right now in North America. It's a very big deal in Europe. So some of the first megawatts going into the ocean are down by Massachusetts and New Jersey right now. And these are very, very, very large projects. And the whole Atlantic corridor is currently being developed, which will eventually come to Nova Scotia. Some of you may have saw the large crane that was in the port of Halifax over the last couple of weeks. It was gearing up for those installations down on the Eastern American seaboard. So, and being that Halifax is a large seaport, I mean, we're picking back right into the energy mix on a continental level, which is quite fascinating, actually. As far as these projects, I do want to point out a little bit more detail on the partnerships, because I think it's fantastic that these new projects have a direct partnership with the local communities, especially the Mi'kmaq bands. So, for example, I'll just list them off and read the details. Don't mind me for reading verbatim. But Benjamin's Mills project near Falmouth, about 70 megawatts. That's being developed by Natural Forces Development. Natural Forces is based out of Nova Scotia, and they're partnering with all 13 Mi'kmaq bands. The Ellers House 3 is being developed by Potential Renewables and the Annapolis Valley First Nation. Higgins Mountain Wind Farm near Wentworth in Colchester is developed by Elemental Energy, and they are partnering with Sebeganegedy First Nation. Weaver's Mountain Wind near Marcia Hope and Antigonish is developed by Sweb Development and the Booscap First Nation, and then Wedgeport Wind Farm, developed by Elemental Energy, is also partnering with Sebeganegedy First Nation. So it's really promising to see large-scale commercial developments partnering with local communities and spreading the commerce throughout the province. Next slide, please. So the last slide is basically the plan from Tim Houston's government on how we want to reach our 80% renewable target. So again, I'm focusing a little bit more on wind because it is forecasted to still be the largest contributor on the renewable energy front. So currently there's 78 installed wind projects, making 616 megawatts across the province. There is 396 megawatts of wind capacity that's in advanced development stage, which were those 5 to 6 projects that we just saw on the previous slide. And then by 2030, that we should be increasing to a total of 1,612 megawatt proposed wind capacity in the province, which would bring us about 38% of all the energy mix in the province. And that's 166,000 homes powered by wind. I mean, that's pretty impressive stuff. And as the technology develops over time, there's larger and larger turbines being produced with higher capacity, which means you need less of them to get to meet as much energy demand that the market generates. So there's a couple caveats here. If we can pull it all off, we can hit the 80% target 4 years early. If the wind projects come in and Muskrat Falls gets up to capacity, and some of the newer projects are coming into development over the next couple of years. The other caveat is that this data doesn't include any of the micro generation stations that Jorge mentioned, like rooftop solar installations on commercial buildings or on residential homes, which just adds to the mix. And I think this course not only shows the large commercial side, but it does key in quite a bit on what you can do even as a resident of the province and as a small business. I know I'm coming from more of the commercial side, but there's a great deal of opportunity that we need to take advantage of to move this energy transition in the right direction of meeting net zero by 2050. And I think that's about it for my spiel. Jorge?
If you allow me, I would like to know, like, in your experience, and in terms of, let's say, I want to focus in jobs creation or job demands, and in your experience in the renewable industry and specifically in the wind industry, it's like what types of jobs are these projects creating or bringing into the province or in the territories, that, because you mentioned a few projects that are happening along with indigenous communities and in their territories, and I think it's quite important to understand like what this means for the community and what this means for professionals like you and me or anyone who's attending this webinar, to understand what's the advantage of having this knowledge or of going through this program, or at least just understanding the very basics of renewables.
Yeah, well, great questions. As far as job creation, I mean, the construction, development, commissioning phase of these projects are hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and it's everything from all trades, electricians, millwrights, crane operators. It'll definitely engage local unions and local vendors, transportation. There'll be a lot of work coming through the Port of Halifax, transportation, road construction, infrastructure. I mean, there's more jobs. I mean, our current infrastructure is not quite the capacity to meet all the demand of the new energy coming in. So Nova Scotia Power will have more of a trickle down effect for, further developing the actual infrastructure. And then as far as longer term roles, I mean, the technical side of service and maintenance is the long-term goals in these projects. That also, it's not just so much just on the wind farms. I mean, that trickles right into the local vendors and supply chain. Representing a large OEM, I mean, we actively partner with communities and local businesses for supplying long-term longevity of these projects, which are to the 25 years in length. As far as education, there's a number of schools in the Atlantic area that I'm partnering with on the actual technician development side. And there's huge demand for wind technicians nationally and internationally. The business is growing at a rate that we can't keep up with actual manpower, and that's actually a very, very large challenge. But also for local businesses, understanding how these projects are developed and how they reach commissioning and COD and then long-term service and maintenance and how they play into the supply chain, et cetera, is incredibly valuable. And we need the support of the businesses and the local businesses. I mean, you can't get everything from Europe, right? It's just not feasible. And microgeneration. I mean, I found microgeneration this course is really valuable for smaller businesses or medium businesses that are looking at microgeneration and looking at getting power production agreements with utilities to help offset their carbon emissions at a local level. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So and we had talked previously about how important or how much this basic knowledge adds to someone's capacity or someone's skills to let's say manage a project like this one. And in your own experience, when you took the program and when you worked through it, which of the topics that you were faced with were the most valuable ones, like during that time? What would you say would be important for your profession, and also, let's say, if we could go further, for your career growth in terms of when you adapt and you bring all this new knowledge into your day-by-day work, and like what do you think could be a highlight of that process?
For me personally, that's a fantastic question. I mean, yeah, you learn everything. You learn something.
I think we may have Lincoln may have
Something every time you do something new. For me personally, I've been working in wind for energy.
We lost you. We lost you. Yeah, we lost you for.
We can hear you now.
30 seconds. Yeah.
Oh, my internet may be a little shoddy. I don't know where I got cut off, so I'll just start again briefly. Yeah, understanding the development side and the energy mix and some of the new technologies. And how it's going to play in what I do every day is incredibly valuable. And I can work guys that they need to make their project sustainable, enhances further development down the road. And I can work. So it's
I might
understand this, and it's just valuable.
Sorry, Lincoln, you were cutting in and out there, but I think we got the gist of it. I recognize that we just have a few minutes left, but we do have 2 questions added in the Q&A from Jim. Thanks, Jim, for your questions. I'll just read them aloud here. So, are there any consumer accessible wind products in development, even if only for supplemental power supply? And then the second one, or it's an addition to, or is solar more feasible for this specific use?
I think I can take on that one. And there are a few technological advances on small wind. I think in terms of a fast pace or immediate, let's say, a project start, I would go with solar, because micro generation is right by the corner, so it's quite easy to find even financing for your own solar or mostly photovoltaic project. It doesn't matter if it's at your home or small business, or it's just easier right now to just go with solar panels, but there are technological developments.
I can
Yes, please.
add that, if you can hear me. Yeah, the easiest, like Jorge said, probably the easiest is solar, and it's probably the easiest to maintain. Wind is even the smaller wind generators are difficult to maximize production just based off of where it needs to be located as far as the backyard of your house. I probably wouldn't recommend that, but where there are rebates through Nova Scotia Power for power production agreements right on the top of your house, and I know it's a lot of people that take advantage of that.
So thank you for the question, Jim. That's great.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Jim. Jim says, thank you in the chat. Are there any other final questions? Jorge's open or added a final slide there with contact information. So I'll just kind of walk you through them. So for the faculty, if you're interested in learning about more about the certificate and sustainable energy technologies that I've added in the chat, added the link to it. It is 100% online. And you can complete it at your own pace. There are 3 courses that comprise the certificate that Jorge walked you through. You could also reach out to him directly as the instructor of the course if you have, or the certificate, sorry, if you have any specific questions. And Lincoln has added his contact information as well if you're interested in learning about opportunities in the industry specifically. And Jorge asked a question of job opportunities, of which there are many. Certainly a growing industry. And I'll just pause here for any other questions. Okay, wonderful. Hearing none, we will end our time. And thank you so much again, Lincoln and Jorge, for your time, for pulling together all of this wonderful information. I really appreciate it. Very informative. And we'll send around a recording of today's webinar in your inboxes. So keep an eye out for those. And thanks so much again, everyone, for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, Lincoln. Thank you, Mary Eleanor.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.